Welcome to the Core Podcast, brought to you by Core to Cloud. We talk about all things cybersecurity, about the latest technologies, the insights, the learnings, and also a little bit about our culture in this ever-evolving environment. I'm Kelly and I head up the marketing department.
And I'm Phil from the technical team, and we're going to take you through all our technology in a really interesting way.
Phil talks technical, while I keep it light-hearted and remove all the jargon. We also have a selection of guest speakers, including a few people popping in from the Core to Cloud team. So let's dive in.
My name is Charlie Morrison. I'm an inspector in the City of London Police's cybercrime unit. Specifically, I lead a program here in the city called Cyber Griffin. And what we do in Cyber Griffin essentially is we monitor information and intelligence in this area, and we translate that into services we deliver for free to the public to keep them safe from cyber criminality. It's an interesting place to work.
The services that you offer, Charlie, is it just for people in London, or is everyone able to access this?
So there's a wide offering from policing now in the cyberspace. So the key things to remember for people across the country who might be looking at this. The first is take a look at your local region. So look at what your local force is doing. There are also cyber resilience centres all across the country now. So if you type in cyber resilience centre, you will find your local one. And again, they offer some really good services that can assist you in terms of keeping yourself safe.
Charlie, how did you end up where you are right now?
That's a great question.
What's the background of how you ended up where you were?
So I've been in policing for just under 14 years, and like many officers, I started on response, and from there I moved into the information side of policing, and in 2017 I joined the cybercrime unit, again because it is a really interesting space to work in. Since then, the cybercrime unit, of course, has dealt with many things, but one of the key areas of development we've looked at are these preventative measures. So getting into understanding what's going on in cybercriminality and developing these services that help people prevent themselves becoming victims of cybercrime, because some of our key opportunities here are around preventing the crime in the first place.
So where you started talking to prevention is kind of where this stemmed our conversation a little bit further. I think we both believe that phishing is here to stay and it's still a problem. Just going into this, do you still think that the email and the human element is still the area that you're focusing on, or feeling that you're needing to support the most with?
Absolutely. So phishing and the socially engineered attacks that surround phishing as an approach are still really the main, but certainly one of the main issues we're facing in cybercriminality today. And if you look back over the past few years, you will see that they're steadily represented in the threats that we're seeing. And again, if you look forward, I'm fairly confident we'll see phishing as something that's here to stay. And there's a number of reasons as to why phishing remains quite a popular approach from the perspective of a criminal looking to get into those kinds of attacks. And one is the low bar of entry, in that it doesn't require a great deal of technical skill to do that kind of approach to someone. You don't need to be in proximity to someone to complete a phishing attack. And of course, you can magnify your attack, which is to say, obviously send them to a large number of emails. Though, as we talk, we'll get into some of the different types of phishing attacks that are out there today.
And also, I guess, do you believe that phishing has got even worse? Because I think most of us communicate that way now, more commonly. Even the people that I'm in the office with I'll pop that in an email, I'll pass that through to you. And so there's that from a communication perspective. It's faxing's kind of gone and letters are kind of gone, so that it becomes the main communication model. So we get used to that in our day in and day out. So that's kind of one thing. But do you also think that the fact that the movement to the cloud has been maybe gone a little bit quicker because of everything that had in COVID, with Office 365, Google, and all those elements, do you think businesses have been prepared for that movement, have been prepared for the volume of how much we communicate on email? And we've got email and Teams and Slack and all of the notifications. Do you think we have been as prepared as we could have been?
Well, I think phishing is in some sense a naturally selected attack because, as I say, there are many things that make it possible for an attacker to engage in that kind of activity. And certainly, for example, looking back at what happened during COVID-19 and the rapid change of working conditions, which in a way necessitated a great deal more of digital communication, that can only have been useful to people trying to complete these kinds of attacks. In terms of whether businesses are prepared, unfortunately, phishing is still highly represented in the crime figures we see. That's not to say that a lot of great work isn't going on the part of businesses to try and educate staff and try and put in the technical measures that can limit phishing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is definitely one of those attacks that I think we're going to see a lot of. Another reason, of course, why phishing is a difficult attack to eradicate is because it's not just phishing. It's not just so actually, it might be a good point to step back and say, in its most fundamental sense, phishing is a communication from sender to a recipient where they will try to falsely represent something. And the purpose of that is either to gain some sensitive data or to get the recipient to click on a link. And there's a good starting point because it shows that phishing can be about sensitive information, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. It can be about the link, but you can see there's a lot of jumping off points you can get from that attack. So it might start with phishing, but it could end in malware, for example, or it could end in another attack. So phishing is also a jumping off point for a much wider range of attacks than just phishing itself.
It's kind of just leaving the door slightly ajar open or not fully locked, or it's not necessarily the main damage. The main damage is once they've got in, right? But like it's just allowing that person to get in or get a little hook is kind of, well, without
It
fun, it's not
certainly could
phishing, isn't
be.
it?
If you were talking
Yeah.
about a more complex attack, it's very possible, for example, that a more complex attack would start with a phishing email. That would be the triggering point to enable the rest of the attack to take place.
And are you seeing from the work that you're doing that phishing is still one of the main culprits of how they've got in? I mean, I think it's the least sexy topic to talk about, but it's still unfortunately one of the main reasons of how they're getting in.
That actually is one of the issues with phishing, is because there's a sense, I think, that we have that people know about what phishing is and that this is a known threat, as it were, and therefore there's a sense that maybe there's not so much work to be done. But certainly in terms of the crime stats, there is a lot of work to be done. This is one of the areas that we can really improve upon. It's not, people know what phishing is, but we really need to continue being really focused on getting the awareness out there and trying to improve our ability to detect phishing because it's still in use.
Why do you think it's a topic that's become less sexy or popular?
Good question. A number of reasons. I think there's a certain amount of exhaustion around the topic because, again, because the term is well known.
Yeah.
I also think that it's because there isn't a magic bullet to the answer. There's not, for example, a technical measure. Certainly there are technical measures which will assist, but there's not a technical measure that simply eradicates the problem, and that can be exhausting as well. And then you've got the fact that phishing does evolve, not necessarily in the attack itself, but for example, you will see through the year as big events take place around the world, this will create a narrative that people who are engaged in phishing will tap into. And so phishing, if you like, self-revives itself as soon as you get a new narrative that people can use. Again, going back to COVID-19, we became more reliant on deliveries, for example. And there were campaigns focused around, okay, I know you're going to get emails around deliveries. I'm going to take advantage of the exhaustion you'll be feeling there, and I'm going to add my own malicious email to the mix to see if I can get a result. And, you could see in a number of ways then, the conversation around phishing can be exhausting.
Yeah, because it's continuous, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a relentless by its nature. Yeah.
And as humans, we kind of like we like a problem and be able to fix it, don't we? I feel like that as human beings, to be told that it's continuous is a bit. Yeah, I feel like to be like continuous is like, oh, okay, that's quite a forever and how and yeah, I think we like to know end dates of things.
Yeah, we certainly do. And I think as well, when you're thinking about security, you like to focus on it for a period and then get on with the job. And phishing has a really uncomfortable angle there because it's always there. And because we're all answering emails, in the mid part of your morning, for example, when you've got your volume emails and you're trying to get through those, your emphasis is likely to shift to productivity. And so we need to work on how we can keep security in people's mindsets. There's a really interesting area around that as it goes, around how you can suggest security when you're doing your volume emails. Lots of stuff you can do around the screen, how you set it up to try and make sure that security stays in your mindset when you're dealing with the day job.
Okay, so you're touching on that. Do you have some recommendations then of, because I'll be honest, I'll come on and I'll look. I mean, normally my email catch up is a Thursday night. Anything between 7 and 1 a.m. is when I try and catch up so that it's not so bad by the time I come back on a Monday. But obviously I'm at home, I'm probably less, I don't know, like, yeah, a bit more chilled out, might have Netflix in the background while I'm trying to get through and respond to them. And I schedule everybody in so it all goes to them at 8 a.m. But is there things that I could be doing that would keep my mindset of like, are you checking this? Are you sure that's from so and so? Do you want to click on that? What would be your kind of recommendations to keep that in your mind?
Okay, so firstly, my first recommendation would be go and watch the baseline briefing that we do, because we'll take people through the key advice step by step. But since you're asking that question, I'll kind of compartmentalize the advice. This question specifically is around how you keep the focus on the security angles. So you can look for particular things, and the classic emails that will jump outside of your baseline of what you'd expect are ones that have a tone of urgency. That's something to wake up to. If there's a tone of urgency, I think that should suggest I need to have a security mindset, because that would be a very common lure used to try and get you to do something outside of what you'd usually do.
And there's that classic, like, oh, this needs to be paid by this day, or we need this uploading by, or something like that kind of language would, okay, so that's what you would need to think on those.
Exactly. And it obviously depends on your role, because you might expect that depending on what you do.
Yeah.
But certainly an emotive approach is usually something that would be endemic of that. So you might have maybe something that's unusually good, or something that triggers a fear response. But certainly any emotive approach, it's possible that the reason is they're trying to put the recipient on tilt, as it were, trying to get them to do something they wouldn't usually do.
Yeah.
Another really big indicator would be an unusual contact. So you might, for example, have a standard form of communication with, say, your bank, and then you get a communication which sits outside of the standard. There, the obvious answer is to use the accepted route, the route that you trust, to get your communication through, rather than accept the unusual route that's then been selected. And I think slowing down, unfortunately, it's definitely one of those. Yeah, I know. I appreciate that's anathema to people doing their jobs.
I'd love to know that one tip of how you, but I do think, like you said, because email is used so much. I mean, it sounds awful. There's some emails that you can read and realize like that was just kind of sent for the sake of sending, sent for keeping in the loop. There is some that you can CC'd is a classic, isn't it? You're CC'd in everything to make sure that you're part of it, but it just becomes noise. So there's a lot of noise when it comes to email.
Absolutely. And so one of the and I say there are many things to teach around phishing, but in terms of this focus idea, one of the things I found particularly useful is the concept of an I will never list. So this isn't a security mechanism. This is simply, there are certain things I'm prepared to do on this email platform. That may or may not include finance, for example, but I would make a predefined set of things I'll do here, and I don't step outside of that. And that way, if something comes up which wants me to do that, it very clearly triggers in my mind. I would say, hold on, this is not the platform that I choose to do that kind of work on. I really like that as a way of keeping security in your mindset, because it's very, very simple. It can be applied quickly. And in a work setting, you can have different personally agreed ways of, when you're, say, doing a financial transaction, something else that has to take place. And if it's not there, it rings out like a bell to you when you get the email around it.
So this is really, I mean, we're talking about people, but that's kind of tying into process, isn't it? Because if you've got really defined processes for that person, it would be a trigger. And we've had it here on our side, in the sense of there was an email that went round about our wages being inaccurate, and that we needed to go on to our our system and update it and our bank details to make sure. And it went round to everyone, and it went round at like a perfect time when people wouldn't really be noticing. And on my team, it also went round in the time when I'm normally picking up my child from school. So they'd even worked out that I wouldn't be very quick at responding. It was only coincidence that like I looked at my phone and I was like, that doesn't seem right, and could message everyone. So it's really sophisticated, isn't it? So, but having processes in place made me realize like I knew that would never happen. No one would ever send that out. It wouldn't have come from that person. It would have been flagged, higher up in management or something like that before a main email went out like that. So yeah, the people in the process piece is actually quite close. I feel,
Definitely.
yeah.
And actually, to take that example, as you can see there, it's an unusual communication which has an emotive angle. So it is fitting two of the flags we just discussed in terms of, and I can understand how that would trigger someone to act outside of what they'd usually do, because it's affecting something quite fundamental to them. It has a finance angle to it. And I take it was click a link.
Oh
That
yeah,
one?
it was click a link of like, we don't think you've got your bank details correct for, I think it was a couple of days before payday.
Right. So the assumption in this particular attack then is you go over to a malicious website which mimics or is mirrored to look like the one you'd expect to see. You type in your credentials and then you've lost your credentials, which does. And I know this, we will get onto various bits of advice, but it's a good point to take a second piece of advice there. So often in phishing attacks, it will be a credentials based attack. So mirrored website and maybe your details have been taken by someone else. So the first thing is, if you think you may have been a victim of that, change your password for the platform you think has been taken away.
Your first recommendation would be change your password straight away.
Absolutely. And there's a whole area of password advice. One of those is to have 3 random words, so a long complex password. Using a password managers, I would definitely recommend, if that's new to anyone, they take a look, because password managers are a really elegant way of managing. If you think about modern life and how many passwords we're expected to have, keeping strong and unique passwords is a really, really big security plus. And password managers are a really elegant way of doing that in a way that's useful to us as users, because once you've got used to using it, it actually is simpler and quicker for you. Not keeping emails or not keeping passwords that are the same across platforms, because of course you're essentially making that password more valuable. And there is an approach called credential stuffing, where attackers will just test other platforms to see if your email address and your password can be used to get into other things as well. So really trying to keep those passwords unique. But yeah, if you were a victim of that particular attack, the first thing would be to change your password, and if you can, two-step verification, which is the idea that to get into your really important accounts, you have, yes, your password, but you also have a second thing, say a text to your phone or the use of an authenticator app. But these things lean on each other. So phishing, you might there have been a victim of the phishing attack, but if you'd had two-step verification, you wouldn't have been a victim of the end goal there. You'd have just lost a password for a period of time, which you then change.
Yeah, which you can get over and kind of resolve. That's doesn't cause as much damage. So going on a bit more of the recommendation piece, I know you've just done one on the password bit, but as what you do day to day, I'm guessing you're seeing, we know phishing is a problem. Are there common trends that you're seeing? And then are there common recommendations that you still maybe are saying that are the foundation and those things haven't changed, but are there some new recommendations you're having to make as this phishing does evolve? I know it's not the most interesting topic, but we do know it's evolving.
Yeah, so firstly, in terms of, I think it's really important to acknowledge this, and I don't see it acknowledged too much, but one of the key things here is that phishing hasn't changed an awful lot over the last few years, and that's useful to us as defenders, because we now know many of the things that will help us identify and ultimately deal with a phishing email. And if you think about cyber as a whole, if we considered every attack that was available out there, what's often said is how quick moving this space is. And that's very true. If we're talking about the most technical attacks, it's a fast moving space. But here, in one of the most prolific attacks we can discuss, it's not that fast moving. That's a real benefit to us as defenders, because it means we know and can teach the skills required to resist this. And the benefit to that is huge. So there's this real positive there in that. I agree, it can be exhausting, but there's a real positive in that. I think in terms of changes there, now I've acknowledged that a lot of it is the same. We have seen indications that the spear phishing is being used more now. So spear phishing is a subsection of the wider phishing. To explain that, if I was to send a phishing attack, I might email a really large group of people based on their membership to something I can key into. So the deliveries example I used earlier, for example. Phishing attack, I would do more research on an individual. I'd craft a more personal email. Now I can send fewer of those because I have to do research, but I get a higher success rate and I get more choice in my target. Now, in previous times, you'd expect that kind of attack to be targeted at the leadership of a given organization or those who have access to either control of the infrastructure or finance.
Yep.
Now it seems that spear phishing is being used more across an organization as well. So it's not just those people I mentioned that might get a spear phishing email, it's others too. And when you're looking at spear phishing, they are sadly more difficult to detect than phishing emails.
Okay.
But there again, there are things we can do. So one of the key things is knowing what's out there about you. For example, if I had a LinkedIn profile, it would make sense. It would be useful from a security perspective for me to know what that profile says. So if someone uses it as a way of ingratiating themselves to me, I wouldn't necessarily think we had a personal relationship. I would think I am aware that that is available about me online. I'm not convinced by those phrases alone that I have a pre-existing personal relationship with the person. There's a
Okay.
lot there as well. You can go into improving your security settings, for example,
Yeah.
on your social media to make sure that you're not that fewer people have access to the kind of, I guess, in the broadest sense here, data is important, even what you would see as trivial data, because knowing about someone is the beginning of being able to strike up a personal relationship with them.
I did a podcast about a year ago or so with a vendor that looks after kind of like social media protection. And on the conversation, he was like, the whole nature of social media is to overshare, right? To overshare the information about yourself. And he was a bit like, but I'm pretty sure you put up a picture of when your child was born, so I can work out their birth date now. I can probably work out where you're located, so what the local hospital is. Now I have your child's birthday and their local hospital. Then he said, if you put a picture up a year later of maybe a toy or a puppy or a dog, I can now work out what your child's first birthday, what he did for it. Also, if they got an animal or a pet, what the first name of their pet was. And I was just like, oh my God. And he was like, these are all the profile information that you would need to get hold of someone's bank account or change a password. And he said, and you share all that information about your child, not to cause harm, but because you want to share about your family. But you're using all those things that they would use as their security words on social
Absolutely.
media without even thinking of being that you're harmful, but you could be.
But here we're approaching a really tricky area, because the internet is an amazing thing, and
Yes.
communication with your friends and family is something you don't want to sacrifice. So I think if the message was simply don't share the personal, then that's problematic, and you're going to buy people out. And this is, if we're talking to businesses, if this webinar is going to be discussing how you approach phishing from the point of view of a business, that's a tricky area, isn't it? Because you don't want to buy people out by simply instilling a fear about using these incredibly useful online tools. As I say, it's about the balance, isn't it? It's about knowing that what's been said is out there, and to be honest, it can't be taken down. So once it's said, it's out there. I think the safe assumption is to say it remains out there. The next thing is really taking advantage of your security mechanisms that are available on social media, so that you can limit the message to the people that you want to receive that message.
Yes.
And then we get into this again. One of the many reasons why phishing is so tricky is because then you get into this domino effect. It's all about, you've got to have the right passwords. If you can get that right in the password manager, if you can get your social media footprint right, that's another plus. If you can identify phishing emails, that's another plus. And all of these things are building blocks to a security that will keep you safe. But in all of those, whichever area of security we're going to discuss, we have to be talking about it as a balance. It has to be something, because it has to be something you buy into. It has to be something that's simple enough you can use. It has to be something you understand. And it has to be something you really buy into. Otherwise, if I simply say, it's a really dangerous place out there and we can't really use the internet. Yeah, I think that's a really negative message that would buy people out of the need to be secure.
And that would be, I guess, for any element of security or policing. If you threw at me any statistics of walking at home alone as a woman in a city centre or any of those things, most of us probably wouldn't leave the house, and that's not necessarily a way to live, is it? Because the world's a fantastic place and you've got to go out and live it and enjoy it. So it's making sure that you make safe choices on things that you can do.
Yeah, informed advice that allows you to strike a balance you're comfortable with is where you, and this is talked about a lot. If you get into information security, there's often there's a triangle they use to explain the interplay between security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Sorry, confidentiality, integrity. But it's the purpose of it is to talk about that dynamic of, if you make a really secure system and no one can access it, it's not that good. And if you make a system that's really accessible, but it can't, for example, keep data as it was originally input, that's not great either. So this balance is a really key part of any security message. I would say it would make sense to consider that balance.
I think this also leads, I believe now from you saying, of getting buy-in and making it still accessible, and is the training piece of how you put the training out, whether in your culturally or how it's executed. That must have an impact on how well it's received and how well people take it on. So I guess, what is your kind of thoughts on training and how that's currently conducted?
So my first thought is, you may, and everyone's going to have their own opinion, but people may or may not see training as valuable in this area. But I would say it's one of the most important building blocks to seeing an improvement in phishing, because phishing is very much about the end user. In every case, an attacker is really asking you to step outside of a security protocol of some description in order to get what they want. And because of the nature of how phishing works, it's very difficult to provide a full defense at a network level. So your opportunity is going to be all around, or a lot of your opportunity is going to be around the awareness. So yeah, if as a general statement, training is extremely important in this area.
So engineered attacks, do you think they're getting more sophisticated? And if so, how can the training or support that?
I would say that you will get, I think you have to expect both sophisticated and unsophisticated. So a term that's often used is evolving and devolving threat, which means certainly in a given space, you're going to see more complex attacks. So in phishing, I'm sure this year we will see some examples of some really complex attacks. At the same time, we will see attacks that have been used before, they're well known to us, and they'll be used at scale and they'll have some level of success. So from the point of view of the person trying to deliver the training, it would make sense to consider both the sophisticated and the unsophisticated. And when we're thinking about where the training has to really be impactful, the goal, I think a useful goal, is to consider that what you're really looking for is to achieve a baseline, hence the name behind our briefing system. But you're looking for getting the basics right consistently. That's where those high volume, low sophistication attacks sit, and that's where you can see a really quick and really consistent security improvement if you can get the awareness to be doing that.
Okay, so I read recently in a report, people trust emails coming from reputable brands who and services that they use, which could mean we could get emails, which I probably get a lot for these, equipment and software updates, mail notifications that you've got encryption, and Amazon delayed shipping that you said that, Google password, expiration notice, action required or payments declined, DocuSign, that's quite a common one, SurveyMonkey or IT Satisfaction, which we use as a company with our customers. So, and I've noticed that more and more people are voting, saying that they can't access that or won't use surveys. Zoom, someone has sent you a link through Zoom Messenger portal or through Teams. So for me, that's an awful lot of common things that I would see every day in my inbox. And I would trust those brands, and if it looks like it came from the right person. So how are we training people to, I guess, be prepared for those? Or I don't know, like,
So now,
I feel like it's
yeah,
assumption
good
thing, isn't it,
question.
of trusting them.
Well, so kind of a moving this again, you're having to, this is how I see it, but you're moving to a different subsection of advice here. This is around identifying emails. And what
Right.
what you've put quite brilliantly there is we can't, for example, tell you the exact email you're going to get. It's
No.
going to be one of so many that it's difficult for us to say this is the way it's going to look. But what we can do is teach the general identifiers, the red flags
Okay.
that will prop up for you. So, and some of these are, for example, is the email address correct or is it unusual? Is there, for example, is the layout changed to what you'd usually expect to see? You can hover over links to see whether they go to where they say they're going to go. You can look at the presentation of the email as well as issues with presentation can denote that this email is actually part of a phishing attack. You can take the body of the email and copy it into a Google search to see if that particular email, exactly as it's presented, comes up as a known phishing attack. So these are just a few of the ways that you can learn to identify and check yourself whether an email is in fact a phishing email. Now, there is a comprehensive list, and again, if you go to the baseline briefing, we will go through the list one by one. We'll show examples of that, and we'll teach what it's giving you in each case. But yeah, what you're talking about there is a very real problem. We can't say which email you're going to get, but we can say there are really good ways of learning to identify these. And then we're back to the first problem, which is how do you then keep your security mindset up there when you're on your volume emails?
Do you think this is a bit of like kind of like when you go for health and safety training and things like that, that it's got to be something that's done regularly and repetitively, otherwise a bit like muscle memory, otherwise you could do the training at the beginning of the year and maybe do a refresher in 6 months time, but we all know we've unfortunately been on a training course, listened to everything that day and then walked out and normal life happens and you forget all that coursework books in your bag. Do you think it's something that, like you said, phishing is not going away, so it can't be something that you can fix on a one-day training course on the beginning of January? And is it something that has to be, I don't know, like a daily thing or a reminder thing or a best practice thing? Or and you just said very simple things of when you open up an email, and it sounds really silly, but I don't think my brain goes, is the email correct? Does that look dubious? Is their footer normal? My brain just reads the content and thinks, oh, that's what Dave needs or Jane needs. So do you think it's like a muscle memory thing so that you do it like when you walk out your house? Like I always tap my handle twice to make sure it's locked. I don't know. Is there something that you can build like a bit of a muscle memory for it?
Yeah, well, actually, again, just to go off topic again, but you notice you tap the handle twice you leave the house. It's because you're innately set up to think about physical security. So
Yes.
another interesting interplay with cyber is part of the challenge here, and when you're doing the training, is communicating or instilling in people the need to protect their digital assets, because it's not innate to us in the same way that it would be to tap your handle twice when you leave the house.
Yeah.
That is very innate. And I imagine if you get away from your house and you haven't done that, you might
I reverse the car all the way back up and go because I didn't tap it twice.
Because of an emotional response to security, i.e. you feel emotionally insecure, you're going, I must now return, I don't feel happy with that, I've got to rectify that.
Yeah, just because I mean my dog's in the house, so I wouldn't want anything to happen to her. And also, yeah, everything that apart from physical, they're all physical items that I care about. But yeah, I just wouldn't. But I think it's just something I was always brought up with, and you get told, your insurance is null and void if you left the front door open, and all these sort of things. But yeah, but something I have to double tap it. If I don't check the door twice for some reason, it doesn't go in my brain. I'll drive down the driveway and be like, oh, did I tap it the second time? So the second time seemed to get me over that.
And I think goods training in this area is going to harness that response, because it's drawing on something that you feel innately. You have an innate sense of what's secure in terms of physical assets, and then trying to get that sense when we're talking about digital assets. That's a bit of a challenge, but I think training that starts with engaging that issue straight away and saying we need to think about, why is this important? Why is it valuable? Before we even get into here's how you defend against it, we need to really instill in people, make them understand that the data they're protecting is of value to them, so that they do get that sense that it's worth protecting. Starts there, doesn't it? So then you get that sense of I need to defend these things, and this is how I do it. Buys you into the process, and then when you get to the advice, it's got a place to go, hasn't it? It's going to key into the things you're looking to protect. Whereas if I simply had started the webinar by saying, here's what you do, less impactful because I've not keyed it into why it's important.
And do you think that's a big thing of making people aware of why it's important? I mean, I think a lot of this when it comes to cybersecurity, when the attack has happened, and there's some famous big names that have happened recently of things that have happened, and you will read the articles and go, oh gosh, that must be awful, and all that's been released. And there were some schools recently in our area that, you know, lost people's passport details and actually impacted members of our staff because they went to those schools, and all of a sudden they're rushing around, and then you really care, don't you? Because, oh my God, that's my passport details or my medical records, or, you know. So is that how do you make someone care for something that they physically can't hold or feel until it happens to them?
I think part of it is talking about that subject directly and engaging that before you get into a conversation about security itself. Yeah. So before we say these are the, say, 19 things we recommend around this area of security, starting with the why is this important to you? And then going through that, not using scare tactics, not by saying, you know, not by reeling off stats necessarily that make it seem like a really difficult thing, but explaining the value of this and what this learning can do for you, how it can make you feel safer online. Because I think people, for example, tend not to feel very safe online, where actually good use of security, you can improve your feeling of safety online by understanding what's going on and what your security measures are around it. So there are benefits there, and teaching that, having that conversation directly at the start of training, I think is useful, because you are trying to instill a bit more of an innate security response than naturally exists, because let's face it, it's a world we can't see often.
Yeah, and I think it removes that you're being sent on a training course on phishing. It's more, do you know what I mean? Like, because it's a tick box exercise.
I appreciate that people don't light up when they get that email. I can understand that.
Yeah, but does anyone of any forms of, I mean, you know, we all get asked to do the fire marshals and all these elements of training, or even if it's just, you know, routine of how to look after the office, or all things that people don't feel like it directly impacts me, or does it? And I feel maybe, and that might be my experience, but I guess with training, until it directly impacts you, it's hard to latch on to why you're doing it. But I think going in with the why makes you understand, oh, okay, this is why I'm not just doing it because someone's telling me I have to do training. I'm doing it because of the greater impact.
And there's a number of reasons why that's a really important battle to win in the awareness part of all this, because, and apologies, I forget who said this. There's a really nice phrase in cybersecurity though that I read some time ago where they said the defender chooses the battleground, but after that, many of the choices that will be made next are by the person doing the attack. So the time, the date, the system that gets targeted, that's really all not something we get to choose. The bit we get to choose is our initial setup. There's a lot of power in that. You get to choose the initial setup, what your security approach is going to be. Now, if you lose the battle about why it's important, in there, you lose this next stage, which is you set it up. And if you set it up well, then there's a lot going for you. But if, for example, you're at the tail end of, say, a phishing attack, there are things you can do, but we also have to accept that a lot of the benefits here, this is why this work is so useful. So a lot of the benefits we've gone past those. We're into remediation. We've now got to look at how we're going to either prevent further damage and so forth. But yeah, that's why that battle is so important.
And you've just talked about the remediation and when it happens. I think we all know, unfortunately, mistakes will be made and people will click on because we're still human, or on mobile, or we didn't do that step process that you said of checking the email, the body and the links. We're being human, or we're on the school run and something happens, or anything like that. I read that 40% of all online scam victims have felt stressed because of an online scam, and that the psychological impact of these experiences slows reporting and is actually fueling the problem because of how people feel. I know we talked about this on offline about, you know, any other crime that's not digital, you would have empathy, or you would, you know, you'd feel sorry for someone that's been robbed or attacked, and the police would come in. It's slightly different, isn't it, when it comes to someone that's been scammed online? It doesn't seem to have that same empathetic feel towards that person. Would you say that's fair?
I would say in some cases, I've certainly come across cases where the person, the victim, has expressed a sense of being, embarrassed by being tricked, say. And we really need, that's, they're a victim of crime, just like any other crime. And it's unfair that they feel that way. We need to get past that, because ultimately someone's made a deliberate attempt to try and get something and they've gotten away with it. The fact is, this is the action of someone who has committed a crime. And it's really important that we do a lot to try and make sure that victims don't suffer those negative impacts. And those negative impacts are very similar to the impacts you would see out of what you might term in this conversation traditional crime. So there's a bit of work to be done there to make sure. And in the business context, say a business is the victim of a breach of some description, and it requires a great deal of effort on the part of the business to then remediate that problem that spans over, say, weeks. It may be possible to identify where the jumping off point was. So say it was an email to someone. It's important that we get into the practice of treating that person as the victim here, as well as remediating the problem, because they may well be suffering a really negative impact. They may think, oh no, I did that. I see my colleagues running around now and I'm responsible, and it's not their fault. They have been the target of someone who's trying to gain access to a system. And so the response, if it was to be a gold standard response, would be to look after that person as well, rather than, as you say, leave them or in any way reinforce the idea that it's in any way their fault, because this is the action of someone else trying to gain entry.
And that will help, wouldn't it? Because if people feel they're in a safe space, they're able to do that they'll report, more people will report, it will improve that. It's a bit like if someone gets robbed down the road in their house, it's likely the neighbour will let the street know. It's not like they'll generally keep that quiet. And it's kind of that, isn't it? Is that, oh, this has just come through my email, I clicked on it, everyone be aware that I've done, like, it's spreading that, isn't it? Because I'd imagine, like you said, I know there's the spear phishing and going after these key people, but there will still probably, it's unlikely that they're just going to go after one person. So if you talk up or see something suspicious, or in any way of life, for seeing something suspicious, the chances are you can protect more people out of that.
Yeah, and exactly as you're saying, there's also benefits in taking that approach from the business's perspective. I know not every business will take this route, but plenty of businesses will sign up to a security standard. And very commonly, when you're looking at security standards, one of the things they'll look at to audit will be, are you getting reports of there being issues? And then are you able to resolve those reports? Now, if you've managed to create a culture where people feel safe to report, then of course you will have that evidence, and you will be getting onto problems quicker. You'll be dealing with them more effectively, and the benefits there are really tangible. So there is both a benefit from the point of view of the person who may become a victim of this, and from the business's perspective to getting that culture aspect right.
Okay. So the last bit, I guess, is because I think we could talk about this topic forever, but
big subject.
It's a big subject that I wanted to create a less than an hour webinar on, which I don't think is possible, but hopefully we've covered a little bit of training, a bit of recommendation about what you do, and we've kind of slowly touched on some topics. But I guess it's kind of the conclusions of this, like, what do you think of the new approaches? What improvements could be made? There's people, processes, and technology. So what should we be looking at that holistically? And also from your point of view, you're with all these businesses that are trying to do better. What are you learning from that? Because obviously cybercrime, like any crime, has a financial impact on businesses and productivity and people, like we've said. So I don't think it's going away. We've touched on briefly how training and how many things you can improve on the approach of this, but what would you say is a kind of conclusive area of what we can do better going forward?
So I think the first thing is to acknowledge that it isn't going away, and that it has to be, even if it's exhausting to put it there, it has to be when you consider the risks here, it has to be there. In terms of where you defend against it, well, everywhere. It has to be in the awareness, it has to be in the processes, and it has to be in the technologies that underlie the systems that you use, because in each of those lies an opportunity for some level of defense. In terms of what's interested me most recently, it's the spear phishing. in the sense that there does appear to have been a slight shift there, in that there's more use of it across an organization than there used to be, very much directed at the leadership. And I think that may in time come to be an awareness change. We may have to, for example, look at spear phishing as awareness more generally. And in terms of making training work, which is at the heart of so many of these things, I think a lot of thought needs to go into that. Certainly from our side, we've had the pleasure of doing this work for quite a few years now. And when I look back to our earlier approaches, I think some of the best development we've done has been in an acknowledgement of the importance of that area. Landing training by grounding it in something that people care about, making it accessible to them, finding the right rhythm of training so that it sticks and provides lasting security benefits. These are the things that I'd be looking at as I was creating training. Yeah, I think there's a tendency with training to say, these are the things I'm going to teach. Got my learning objectives, I'll tick them off, jobs are good. And I think with this, because of all the things we've discussed, the exhaustion of phishing, the sense that you already know what it is, and the lack of being able to connect yourself to this kind of security, those elements, those cultural elements to training are hugely important. And you benefit by really getting a grip of them and trying to integrate that into what you're trying to teach.
Obviously, technology can play a bit of a part to support this. If someone is looking into technology to support them alongside the training, what key things would you want the technology to be looking out for? Is it the vendor? Is it the integration with your business? Is it the way that how the technology can read the email now for AI? What would you, if you were purchasing technology to support? We know it's only going to help one element, but if someone did have a budget for that, what things do you think they should look out for a technology partner?
So I think one of the things is, it's definitely worth taking a look around the field, because this is quite a fast developing area of technology. There's a lot of new solutions out there. So I think one of those things is getting a grip of what's available to you. As you say, there are now the contextual analysis ones as well, which will actually analyze the words themselves and so forth. I would, and I'm going to end on a dull note, I'm afraid, it's layered defense, isn't it? So it's going to have to be, let's look at each layer and let's see what's available to us in terms of either cutting out emails that shouldn't be there, detecting them, using trusted email, DMARC, DKIM. There's various technologies there, but I would take a layered approach and build up to trying to have something, as many layers as I can. Really, though, hinging on staff training, which would be at the top, and for me, one of the most important ones, because they will be there on the day in every instance. And if they've got the right knowledge, they can do a lot to resist this particular area of cybercrime.